On behalf of the Magnet Cove High School East program, we welcome you to the 2021 Virtual Veterans Day Assembly. Today we take a moment to show our appreciation for the sacrifices veterans make and let these veterans have the floor to tell their stories. Now please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Dalton Reed.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now join us for the national anthem led by Madison Polk.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched, were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
We are here with three veterans of the United States Navy, Mr. Mike Samons, Mr. James Kimzey, and Mr. Jim Kimzey. And we are going to let them tell you some stories about their service during their time in the military and anything else they would like to talk about. So I just invite you to sit back and relax and enjoy their stories.
I'm going to say one thing. James, you were in the Army, weren't you? As far when the
CIA.
GIA?
CIA.
CIA, okay.
Yeah, in the Army. Yeah, I've been in the Army.
I thought you were in the Army, special assignments, but in the Army.
What were you in, Jim? I didn't know that.
I was in the Army.
Army too.
Army.
And I was in the Navy.
He doesn't know what this is.
I love that. So you were in for many years.
No, not for many years. I was in for 5.5 years into active duty. I graduated from the Naval Academy in 1966. I graduated from high school in '66 and graduated from the Naval Academy in '71. And I had been selected, I guess is a good way to say it, to go into nuclear power, particularly nuclear power submarines. And so in doing so, the first year basically of your active duty, you have 6 months of schoolhouse training, which is fed to you for basically about 6 days a week, and it's equivalent to getting a master's in nuclear engineering. So we went through that part, and I did that in Vallejo, California. And after that, we went. They have prototypes in about 5 different places in the country. One of them is on the high desert in Idaho, where I went to prototype. They have at that time they had 4 different reactors, including the very initial one that went into the Nautilus. In fact, the Nautilus prototype was built at the same time the submarine was built, and they actually had power on the Idaho Desert before they had power on the Nautilus.
Oh,
So
interesting.
now,
Where were those locations, Mike?
locations.
You mentioned what? Did you say 4?
Oh, the other places?
Yeah.
There's New York, Pennsylvania, trying to remember where the other places are, but there were about 4 places in the U.S. Basically, Westinghouse or GE ran most of those because most of the reactors were either Westinghouse or General Electric reactors.
Well, were they all doing the same thing?
They were all different. They were all different prototypes, basically.
Oh,
The Nautilus was out there. The Norwal, which is a natural circulation, was out there. The carrier, the first carrier, nuclear carrier. I can't think of its name right now. The prototype of it was out there. I'm trying to remember the other one that's out there. There were 4 at the time. I think they built at least one more because they were talking about right after we left, because they were building the reactor for some of the super nuclear carriers, and those reactors were very distinctive from the standpoint that, and then this gets into a lot of technology. So it gets into that the reactors that were on the submarines and on ships up to that point in time could not develop localized hotspots because they were closely coupled. What the words are is closely coupled. And if you had power, if you developed power here, it would spread the power and equalize the power across the reactor. On those, we were on the edge of becoming uncoupled. And so that was one of the reasons it was going to be very interesting to run that reactor.
Right.
well, what was your purpose there? You just
What was our purpose
you were
there?
learning how to run the reactor?
Yes, our purpose there, the schoolhouse phase was all the theory of
The book learning, huh?
Yes, all the theory of everything from thermodynamics to radiation control, all these other things like that, and it was all books, and everything, like I said, 6 days a week, and constant testing. You went from one subject to another. But then when you went to prototype, what you did is you literally went through, and basically it was the powerhouse, the power plant of a submarine, and literally they had these brakes that would take the power generated. We would literally generate electrical
a
power.
dynamometer there to absorb the power.
So we had to have brakes to absorb the power. So we made lots of power, but the thing of it was that you went around and you did everything from operating very long, we call them long-winded valves that took a long time, big valves that had to be operated to cut off steam and things like that. Didn't matter whether you were an officer or enlisted or who you were going to operate those valves. But as you did that, you'd go through with each piece of equipment, and the people that were assigned there, you would have to go through and explain to them how it worked and show them that you knew how it worked. And they would sign off that you had gotten to that point, and you had to go all that way. And then the final thing, at least for the officers, was you stood a watch and brought the reactor critical, and shut the reactor back down, and then you had a oral board.
What was the personnel setup though? Did you have
Yeah.
seamen that
Yeah.
you could say do
Well,
so-and-so? But did you team up and get a group of people that's gonna be your team
Well,
all during your career?
No, this is all different people. That was to the class that you were working with, the class that had graduated and gone there, but it was enlisted and officers there, and they were standing the watches throughout that power plant system,
Just like a regular crew then?
just like a regular crew.
Cool.
And then like I said, then you had an oral board where they would sit there, and you got to stand up and explain why the reactor vessel wouldn't crack.
I busted
and
it
things
right
like
there.
and things like that.
Well, what was the pass-fail rate? Did people
Oh, well,
bust out, or?
the washout rate, because you start washing. I mean, in school, if you don't cut it even in that first 6 months,
The book part, yeah.
yeah, they start. If your grade point is low enough, they start sending you away. So out of the class that we probably had, I would tell you that probably 60% made it through, would be my guess, something like that.
That's something I think
Okay, go ahead.
many people don't understand about the military, and it's, when you get into technology, when you get into certain aspects of the military, it's very, very selective. And many people don't realize just how true that is, and how stern and difficult it is to get into some of those high technology or even especially military ranks.
And the thing of it is, before any of it, especially the officers, the enlisted were tested, and when they are first sign up, they're tested, and then they're tested again before they ever are even considered for the nuclear power. And the officers, you go to college, and then we got to go see a gentleman by the name of Admiral Rickover, who was a very interesting person, and when you did that interview, it was not a single interview with him. You had at least 3 interviews before you got to see him, where you would talk to these people. These people were the experts in nuclear power. They all worked directly for him, but they would sit there and they would take you in, and they'd start into the math guy might sit there and say, okay, tell me what an integral is. Tell me what a derivative is. On and on. And what he would do, he would step up and up and up, and he'd finally, he'd get in, maybe surface integrals or wherever, and he'd take you as far as he wanted to take you. And then if you answered those questions to that point, wherever that was, he'd stop. Then he might go into heat transfer or thermodynamics or some other subject, and you had 3 of those before you even had a shot at talking to Rickover. So that's when you say did they wash out? Yeah, they washed out, but it was part of it. They had a lot of being washed out earlier than that. When Rickover was the term is a stress interviewer, and he did all kinds of interesting things, from putting you in closets to having you sing to just trying to put you on the spot. See,
Boy, he was a famous guy.
What was that?
the classic one happened the year before I went to see him. A guy was planning to get married June week, the graduation week. And Rickover has his file on every one of us, and that was in his file. And Rickover looked at him and said, "Hey, I see you plan to get married. I don't think you can get through my schooling and be married at the same time. Would you be willing to break your engagement?" And this guy was really wanting in. He said yes. And he had a phone brought in and had this guy call the girl at work and broke up with her. And then Rickover, in his inimitable way, went nuts and told him, "You are blankety blank blank.
Mm-hmm.
Get out of here. I don't want you in my program. I would not have you in my program."
Yeah, you're still out that easy, huh?
If you're willing to do something like that, don't want you.
Interesting.
So his are very much a stress interview.
Yeah. Well, what about you, Jim, on your
Oh, it's kind
casework?
of, I'll be willing, you go ahead. Why don't you go ahead, Jim?
No, go ahead.
Well, my career in the Army was rather weird. I went through advanced ROTC, probably like you did, Jimmy.
I did.
And then I went on to graduate school at Kansas State and got a PhD in those days it's called engineering mechanics, but it was really applied math more than anything else. And during that time, I was delayed going into the Army. You usually go in out of advanced ROTC as a second lieutenant, and I've been delayed to go to graduate school so many times and so long that I went in for active duty as a first lieutenant. Now, my active duty was not what anybody would call active duty. I was assigned as a military detailee to NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration. And I went to Marshall Space Flight Center, which is in Huntsville, Alabama, and worked in essence under Mr. von Braun, the German rocket scientist, and more about that in a moment. But on that base of about 8,000 government employees, there were 3 of us military detailees. There's myself, Army, first lieutenant, and another lieutenant like me, turned out to be a really good friend, and a Navy guy. What is what is the equivalent of lieutenant in the Navy, Mike?
Lieutenant, your ensign, Lieutenant JG.
Lieutenant JG, I guess it was. And every once in a while, he would just disappear. Where is he? Well, he's on a barge taking the rockets on the Tennessee River up into the Mississippi River, down the Mississippi River, and back around to Cape Canaveral. What wonderful, terrible duty. You know?
Somebody had to do it.
So it was a pretty good program, I thought. It got technical people, and just trying to get all the technical people you could into NASA because we were kind of in the middle of the Sputnik scare.
Yes.
And so my job, again, just total luck. I got stuck in the division that was with a group of Germans that had come over from Peenemünde with von Braun. And that was an eye-opener, let me tell you. And my personal biggest job got to do was, it was I don't know if you know this project, but the public got to know it in 1972 or so. It's called Skylab. It was to take the upper stage of the Saturn rocket and leave it empty. The moonshots, it was 3 stages, first, second, third, with the crew on top. But this was to take the crew off the top and leave the 3rd stage empty like a big tin can and put instruments inside it and make it a space station. In essence, it was the US's first space station. And we called it the S4B workshop. That was the name we knew for it. And it was in the planning stages when I was there. And my job was to write this. It turns out my biggest job while I was there was other things, but to write the software to simulate the motion of this thing going around in orbit. And it's a 6 degree of freedom program. And it's just total luck again. Here I come, a brand new, minted PhD, right out of an advanced dynamics class, right into that slot. And they were all rocket guys, shoot it up. And most of the guys were rocket guys. They didn't know how to do what they wanted done, and I was just fit. And so I wrote the program, and I don't know if you know the language. Jimmy probably knows that language, Fortran. And
I know more of it than I do about it.
It was numerically integrated dynamics equations, and no screens, everything's a printout. Bosses running around, huge piles of printouts under the arm. They think if it's a printout, it's a holy grail of being correct, but as you all know, it isn't. So what was fun though was that it was in the planning stages, and all these dudes had all their favorite projects they wanted to load onto this spacecraft. You know, what if we do this? What do we got to do to rotate it around, keep it pointed at this one spot in desert or Kansas, and we do this and we do that. And everything you do to a spacecraft totally changes its dynamics, particularly. It's away from the center line, has some weight. So I would run an orbit or two, and they've been control it with reaction jets. The squirt, squirt, squirt you may see on TV. And the idea was, how much reaction jet fuel are we going to use? Well, hell, we use it all up. You can't do that mission. My program would say, whoops, we ran out, folks. But everybody was totally enthusiastic about their project, you know. What do we do with this? What do we do with that? Run the orbit, you know, and see how much you use. And make a long story short, though, we ended up using both reaction jets and what's called control moment gyros. Control moment gyros, they're huge, gigantic gyros with 5 wheels, and you bolt them to the spacecraft, bolt them, you know, and gyros don't want to change direction. They want to conserve the momentum. So you try to rotate the gyro, you don't rotate, the spacecraft does, around it. So we ended up using both of those. Ran into a lot of people, and to finish my story about this, Mike was talking about Rico, or his famous man. I'll say a little bit about von Braun. I was in this group of Germans from Peenemünde, and they were a very interesting group. They had older ones that hated Hitler's guts.
Really?
And young ones that had been Nazi youth. And I never will forget a Christmas party we got asked to. Had a mixture of these people. And before the night was over, a lot of alcohol was involved. And we fought World War II again. And in Germany, and 2 or 3 Americans like us were back up against the wall, our eyes hanging open. These guys were, it got bad. And but Mr. von Braun is one of those few people that I've ever run across that know instinctively how things technically work. Some people that way.
Right. Yes, sir.
And my erstwhile running mates in the office told me one day that Mr. von Braun wanted to see me. He's up on the 10th floor. I'm in the 2nd floor. You know how a bunch of guys are. Well, they're pulling my leg. Bullshit. Yeah. So up I go. I'm going to see. I walk in the office. I understand Mr. Braun wants to see me. So the secretary, yes, he does. Go right in. So I fall to the floor. So I go in. He's sitting there just like Mike and Jimmy. Just, and he wanted to talk about my project, and we talked about it. And it's just great. Just a normal guy, but he knew somehow. I don't know how he did it. Who in that labyrinth of people were working on what, and he kept up with what was going on by actually talking to that person.
Wow.
And so that's the extent of my military duty. There's lots of other war stories, but that's another stuff.
How long were you there, and where were you, Huntsville?
I was in Huntsville, Alabama for a year and a half. I got out early to go back to the University of Arkansas to teach in engineering.
Wow.
I got one question with Fortran. How many times you run the computer while with do loops?
Say the question again.
How many times did you run the computer while, see how long it would go with a do loop?
No. I don't know the answer. I know I did tangle up with IBM. And they had a language called, IBM put out a language called DSL-90, Digital Simulation Language, the 90 computer. It was an IBM computer. And you're saying, did we lose accuracy as we ran
No.
on do loops?
No, there's a do loop that you can make an endless do loop.
Yeah.
Fortran real easy.
Yeah.
And you can see just how long the computer will last or will keep going, trying to do that.
Never did
statement.
fall into that trap, no.
That would have washed you out, probably. That being selected.
You did have to worry about accuracy, though.
Oh, I'm sure.
You know, you do that numerical integration enough,
Well,
and it's like anything, it's really a problem. If you started off wrong, you're screwed at the end, no matter what.
that's right.
So, You had to worry about the accuracy.
Wondering how many, several decimal points beyond.
I didn't worry about that. I took all it would give me, and at the end, whacked them all away, except 2 or 3. Get in the ballpark.
Yes, sir.
Well, Jim, you want to tell us some?
Well, yeah, like Jim, I went through the ROTC program at Henderson and accepted a regular Army commission. And for those that don't know, that means they've got you for as long as they want you, essentially. But the good thing is, whatever rank you get to keep. You don't get caught up in reduction in forces and whatnot, which are so common following wartime things. But I graduated there and went on active duty immediately in '65 and was headed to Fort Bragg, North Carolina when I called home and my mom told me, you need to go to Fort Gordon first for the basic course, and I was a Signal Corps officer. So we changed direction and went down there. It's been a few weeks, and then from there I went to Airborne School at Fort Benning, and then back to Fort Bragg, where I was in a signal battalion with 18th Airborne Corps. And was there for a couple of months, and then went down to Dominican Republic. Most folks don't remember that little escapade down there in '65, '66. The Marines, there was a basic story was there was a dictator there, was assassinated in '61, but he was tough and corrupt, but he was anti-communist. And so the United States, and particularly President Johnson, was all concerned about the replacement guy being communist. He felt like Castro was funding their initiatives and whatnot. Anyway, and there was a lot of turmoil during that period of time. The rebels and the government folks, and back and forth and back and forth. So finally, the Marines went in after some problems down there and were going to escort folks out, Americans and others. They were dangerous, and that was the United States was part of the Organization of American States, OAS, with other mid-America countries. Anyway, long story short, I was down there a few months, and it was considered a combat zone. Got shot at, everybody got shot at occasionally, but not bad, not like Nam or whatever. But so I got out of there. I had my wife was about ready to have our first child, and I had a commander of our unit, forward commander, knew about it. And he had a big family, and he was very compassionate about those kind of things. And so he said, "I want you to get on the plane as a courier." And I said, "What am I to take?" And he just looked at me and says, "Kimzey." So what he was trying to tell me is I can get you back to Fort Bragg. And he said, "Don't come back." And that's why, don't come back like you had a choice. But as it turns out, I got home and our daughter was born a couple of days later. And he got orders for us to stay, and him and me and one other fellow, to stay at Fort Bragg. So I didn't have to go back. A few months later, went to Vietnam and had a good tour over there. I was very fortunate. I was stationed in the train. I was scheduled to go way up north near the DMZ, but they had a full complement of officers up there, and so where I was scheduled to go. So I stayed in a little town called Matrain, which was relatively safe compared to many places. It was kind of rumored to be an R&R center for the Viet Cong, for those guys, and so you never knew when you were walking around who it was. We had guards. We lived off base. There would be 10 of us in this little house that we lived in, and we always had a guard, and he could identify them. He'd say, "PC, so and so on." But my tour over there was relatively uneventful. I traveled around a lot. I commanded the headquarters unit at a signal group, and I wasn't a group commander. I was a headquarters company commander, and but it was interesting. I tell folks, we occasionally get rocket attacks and and things like that, and go on big time alert. But But overall, it was relatively safe, and I was very fortunate. I tell folks probably the best thing that ever happened to me in my life, in my military career, was I never had to kill anybody. Never had to shoot anybody. Came close, everybody did just about, you were at risk at certain times, certain places. But it was, that's something I'm grateful for, and I truly appreciate and respect all those folks who weren't so fortunate. They were put in a position they had no choice. Whatever their religious or their beliefs were, or whatever their circumstances were, they just had no choice. And I would like most everybody else, I would have done what needed to be done. I'm just glad I wasn't put in that position. And so after my tour there, I was scheduled to come back to the senior officers course at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and I asked them to hold because I wasn't sure I was going to stay in the Army. I loved the Army. I really did like the Army. But I had a daughter and a wife that I hadn't spent very much time with for a couple of years, and I didn't see much hope for the future. I would spend a few months at Fort Monmouth and been back in Vietnam, which wasn't a big problem for Vietnam, but I just finally decided and came to terms with the fact that wasn't the way I wanted to raise a family. And there have been times when I've looked back and said, wish I'd have stayed, But for the most part, I'm really happy with my decision. But came back, and I was stationed down in Fort Hood, Texas, for a couple of years before they released me. And at Fort Hood, we did things that people don't normally think about. I spent a tremendous amount of time working on civil disturbance plans. Our unit had responsibility for Detroit, Chicago. We were sent to Chicago twice. Once during '68 during the Democratic National Convention, and again later. Later during the civil disturbance, yeah. But federal forces were never deployed, but we were there. In that sort of situation, when federal forces were out, we were at the Great Lakes Naval Air Center, for instance, sitting there waiting. But the federal forces never deployed. The way that works is if a state has a problem and need to call federal forces, then the federal forces take overall responsibility and the cost of all that. And there's a process that they go through to do that. So we were there twice. Actually, the second time there were federal forces deployed. So we wrote plans for all that stuff, and then plans for Johnson's funeral. President Johnson. So people don't think about all the work that goes into so much of that stuff. But literally every moment, every detail of his funeral was laid out on paper. And there was, it wasn't all the process from the time of his death and wherever he was to how he was going to get back to Texas to the final gun. So it was interesting. That was busy work. That was really busy work. But all in all, I enjoyed my career. Well, it was short, about 5 years, some years, and if I had to, I'd do it again. But I did enjoy the Army, enjoyed the service. Met a lot of good people, and I met some guys that weren't so good. But it was a wonderful experience. Wouldn't trade it. I didn't meet anybody famous. Like you
That's
guys.
what I was going to ask. Did anybody meet anybody famous?
No, nobody famous. But, I was around some seen some relatively well-known general officers, but I wasn't close to them. I would just see them, and was next to them sitting for dinner or something like that. But no big time contacts like you guys.
Well,
That's pretty impressive, though, planning funerals for presidents.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I just had a piece of it. Everybody had a piece, but
That's still.
but it was
I desperately, when I went into officer's basic at Fort Bliss, it was Air Defense Artillery. I don't know if they exist anymore. Our job was to shoot down Russian bombers. And at that time, bombers were no longer a threat, but we trained with the Nike Hercules to be battery commanders. When I went into there, I desperately wanted out of the Army. I really did. But their training and their educational techniques and what they did, I changed my mind totally.
Yes, sir.
And like Jimmy, they made a convert of me as far as the training was concerned and the education.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
And that makes three of us, because in all honesty, and Linda has heard this, and she probably doesn't approve of it, but, because I didn't know her at the time, that's my wife. If they had allowed me to do what I wanted to do, which was stay at sea, I made an offer to them that most, in Navy terms, people would not even think about turning down, because I told them if they would leave me at sea and let me operate my submarines, I'd stay in. But they had other plans for me.
Yeah,
Yes.
that usually happens. One of the things I did down at Fort Hood too was, of course, the Army's famous for overloading, particularly junior officers. I was a captain at the time with extra duties. Just one after the other. Do this, but or the officer of the day of the post. Whatever. Just on and on. Anyway, I served as for the better part of that 2 years as a defense counsel and I'm not an attorney, defense counsel for
UCMJ.
for folks picked up that were primarily for AWOL in that 4th Division, that 4th Army area, which was a few states down Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, whatever. And there were quite a few of them guys coming back from Nam or didn't want to go. And so that was interesting. We would have, most every week we would have, 4 or 5 special court trials, and that was interesting. Frankly, a couple of those really stood out in my mind. There was, I don't know if most folks won't remember it, but during the Vietnam War, there was what they called the 100,000 of folks that did not qualify educationally to be drafted, but they picked 100,000 of them and drafted them. Well, there was just one story, one fellow who was of Spanish American descent, and he could not read, and he was a diesel mechanic. He worked for some folks and had his own little business in his backyard. Had a big family. Well, he got drafted, and come to find out the reason he got drafted is when he got a draft notice, he didn't have enough knowledge to read it to go see about anything. So they came and picked him up, basically, and so we finally he took off. They got him in and started a process of getting him out of the Army, frankly, but finally they just had to take him to trial after about the second, third time. He'd go home. He had a nutty mother-in-law, by the way, that was a troublemaker, and so he had to go home and take care of his family. And so finally, they just put him in jail and said, "You can't go anywhere till we get this done, till we get you tried." It was interesting when it was all said and done. And this was a court that had five senior level officers on it, if I remember right. We got this guy, and he'd already been AWOL about 4 or 5 times. All they did to this kid was 2 weeks restricted to company area. And that just made my day that this guy was going to, all he had to do was stay around till they could get the paperwork done to get him out, on a jail discharge. He should never have been there anyway. But that was, and then we had a guy that was a snake charmer of sorts. He worked with snakes, and he was in jail, and he said, "I'm not writing that uniform ever again. You can do whatever you want to me." He said, "I don't care." He said, "Kick me out. Give me enough dishonorable." I said, "I just want out and go back to work." And I said, "Do you realize what this is going to do to you the rest of your life?" He said, "I don't care." "You know how many folks work with snakes?" he said. I said, "No." He said, "I will not have any problem making a living with what I do." And it was just, but that was the guy was a fruitcake. But anyway, that was interesting, to see how scared, frankly, some of those kids were.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they just
And what's more interesting is that UCMJ is different from our justice, the justice system that we know from the standpoint
Yeah.
that you are considered basically guilty till
Yeah.
you can prove your innocence.
Yeah. But that was an interesting time.
Well, it sounds like you guys have had some tremendous experience. I've just enjoyed listening to you guys talk about your experience and your time of service. And I think what most people don't realize is the sacrifice, like you were talking about, Mr. Jim, being away from your family and the life that it does bring. It's tough to be away from the family a long period of time, and it's rough. I think it takes a special person or persons, a special family unit to make it work, especially when you're gone.
It does. I just think about, my time, for instance, in Nam. I talked to my wife once while I was over there, over Mars, what they call the Mars Network. And I think about what they can do now, and at least what soldiers that are abroad can do now. They can communicate and they can see each other, and that's phenomenal. And then I take the back end of that situation, World War I, World War II. They didn't know where they were, don't know whether they were alive or dead, didn't know when they'd see them again. They were gone 3-4 years. That was such a commitment that those guys made, and World War II particularly, but World War I as well.
Yes,
It was just, I think about what those guys did, and I love watching good movies about World War II,
Yes, sir.
and see what those guys put up with. I just have such tremendous respect for the so-called greatest generation. Just phenomenal.
It definitely was the greatest generation.
Yeah.
And I think that's lost a lot today, in today's military. I think they're good people and good folks, but you're absolutely correct. It was an amazing generation, what those guys did and what they went through and sacrificed. And the thing I found is a lot of them would never talk and tell their stories.
Oh, yeah.
They
Yeah.
just, were very,
You know
tell
what?
they had pride.
Jimmy didn't say, and I didn't say, but we both graduated from this high school.
Yes, sir. That is outstanding. Magnet Cove alumni. What year did you graduate?
56.
56. Okay. And
61.
61.
He's older than I am.
What's this about good looks, though?
So we have Magnet Cove School, high school graduates right here with us. That is
And there's Malvern.
And here's Malvern. Just down
You're
the
gonna
road.
hold it against me?
Used to would.
Was there anything any of you guys would like to add about your stories or anything else you would like to wrap up with?
Well, I'd say this. I just have such tremendous respect for folks that serve in the military, and those that are serving now and those that have served before, and there's just a feeling that I think a veteran carries around with them that it's not something you want to brag about. In fact, sometimes I get a little, not irritated, but just say, I don't need to wear a Vietnam veteran's hat,
No.
That's not important to anybody, but me. And but I do have tremendous respect for veterans, those folks that put their lives on hold for whatever time or whatever to serve.
I'm Glen Coston. I'm a product of Magnet Cove. I'm very proud of that fact. I graduated from high school back when the dinosaurs were running up and down this hill, and this building that we are in today didn't exist. I was not ready for college. When I got out of high school, my dad had a stroke when he was 33 years old. And so financially we weren't able for me to go to college at the time, and I wasn't mentally ready for it. And I know a lot of time guys are not ready, and we parents try to force them into it. But anyway, I wound up in 1953, the 9th day of February, I joined Arkansas National Guard and had my initial training, and I don't know if you've ever been to Fort Polk,
have
but
been to
it's
Fort
an
Polk.
interesting
Yes,
place
sir.
to be, especially with your initial training in the summertime, because it's hot down there. But anyway, I enjoyed it. I progressed up through the ranks. And in 1957, if history is still being able to be taught, we had the crisis in Little Rock over integration. And our governor at the time called out the Guard, in my opinion, to prevent the young blacks from entering school. I didn't agree with it at the time, and I don't today. But anyway, I was fortunate. I did not have to go at that time. But after he did that, President Eisenhower, to take control out of Governor Faubus, he federalized all of the Arkansas National Guard. So I was called active duty in September of 1957. And that I was called that morning, and that night I'd going over Broadway Bridge, going to Camp Robinson for duty at Little Rock. And so I wound up there. The duration of the process wound up there till school was out in May. We ensured that the young blacks had the opportunity to safely enter the school. I had an interesting position. I had come up in the ranks and had a squad, and my squad patrolled the front of the school. And I watched this for 2 weeks. My young troops would go down to the end of the sidewalk and stop, come to, and Mr. Hartzell knows what I'm talking about, but a high port position with their weapon, which comes up like this, and turn around. And this photographer from, I think he was from, well, he's from Illinois, and I've forgotten the little town that he is from, but had stood down there for 2 or 3 weeks. And one day he caught the perfect picture. As my young soldier went down, there was a young black girl coming across the street. And as my young soldier went down and came up to High Port, it looked like he gave her what we call a butt stroke. And Mr. Hartzell knows what I'm talking about on that. But anyway, it's just you're taking your weapon and doing this. I'm left-handed, so that's why I'm backwards. But, and so anyway, about 2 weeks later, I got a picture from a friend of mine in the city where that picture was taken. It was front page headline of this butt stroke. And so I have, and maybe I shouldn't say it in your presence, but I kind of have a disdain sometimes for our public media and such, and the way they report, and especially today, how they report. Now, I realize we're here to talk about my military service, but that was a part of it. I got released the latter part of May, went regular Army the next week, wound up at Fort Chaffee for 3.5 months. I thought I was going to get to stay there for a while for advanced infantry training. But I didn't. There was 14 of us, and 13 of them went to Germany for a nice tour, and the 14th one, which was me, wound up going to Korea. And so in August of '58, I'll get off an airplane in Tachikawa, Japan, and step off of it and go to, at that time, we still had a military base there called Camp Drake. I went there for 2 weeks. And then, of course, from there, I went to Korea and wound up, and at that time in '58, Korea was still devastated from the war that had ended. Seoul, Korea, which was the capital, you know, I tell our young people we need to be thankful for what we have, because even at that time, there were people living under the hoods of our vehicles and old vehicles that had been destroyed during the war. They were living in tents and everything else, and Seoul was just virtually still destroyed. But 8th Army compound had been pretty well rebuilt, and it wasn't that bad. But anyway, that night they shipped me 100 miles up north to Moonsonee, which was a little Korean town, and our base was just about 2 miles above it. But Moonsonee was a little town, and most of the villages were still constructed out of straw and that kind of thing. Had wooden floor, had dirt floors. Most of their buildings did, and so it was still, in my mind, it was a sad situation for the people of Korea after having gone through the war like that. But I joined the 4th Cavalry Regiment, and they stuck me in a desk job for a couple of months, and I'm not a desk person. And so the recon unit, the sergeant for the recon squad position came open, and I got it. So I spent the rest of my 10 months basically in the recon. And it was fascinating because I got to see a lot of Korea on the ground. But I had another thing that was good. We had what we call a personnel carrier. Now, Mr. Hartzell's, his was totally different from what we had. He had the 113. We had the old M75, which was an air-cooled engine, had an air-cooled Continental engine, and the greatest part about it, it had a big exhaust stack that come up over the front. And if we were out at night and had a few minutes to relax, you could get up there and lay next to that warm stack and stay warm. And the other good part about it is you could keep your sea rations warm there. So we carried our sea rations in our track vehicle, and if we were out for several days, which most of the time we were, we could warm our sea rations up there, and it was a nice place to sleep if you could sneak in a few minutes up next to that manifold. The other thing that was fascinating is we had 2 small tanks. They were M41, what we call the M41 tank, and I know that probably doesn't mean much to you, but what you have seen is our M1 Abrams and all of that, which is big monster, which is awesome. But ours was a small tank, had a little 76 millimeter gun, and that's why I've got hearing aids. One of those suckers pulled up over our position one night and fired that thing, and the blast, and I'm right under it, the blast deflectors blew me off the hill, and I couldn't hear for a week. And so when I got out of the Army in '61, I had this hearing problem that I still have today. But anyway, thankfully the VA takes care of that with these. But anyway, it was a fascinating tour in Korea. I got to see the ravages of war. Thankfully, we didn't have that much problem. We had a couple of ambushes when we were out. Thankfully, we didn't lose any of our men on that. And so I didn't see the major conflict, and I thank God for that. Because the winter of '50, our guys nearly froze to death because we were not prepared for the cold weather that hit that winter. The troops that we brought in, unfortunately, was not prepared to go into war. And this is what scares me today with the mental attitude that's evolving today with our leadership and with our military. We've had this mess in the Middle East now for the last 20-something years. We came out of Vietnam with a totally different concept, with the strategy that the Vietnamese used, and the Middle East used the same thing, basically small groups and such. And I experienced that being in recon with the small group we have, especially at night. We were out, and I literally crawled up on a tank and could have dropped a grenade down the hatch had it not been a war game that we were playing, and with small groups, and so it's very serious. But anyway, it was a fascinating experience. I saw some heartbreaking things. I saw kids your age, little bitty kids. Back then we had C rations. Most of it was in cans and so forth. And if we were out in a maneuver, the kids would come and want our cans just to lick the lids of our can. In the winter, it was cold, it was hot in the summertime. I have seen, and I have a great granddaughter that's about this tall, and I've seen little kids out in 20-degree weather, barefooted, with maybe a t-shirt and some form of what we would call a diaper on. You know, and so that's the heartbreaking thing of war that we don't realize. We're blessed. You young men and women are, and I thank God that you are, that you're blessed, and we have not had to experience that. And my prayer is that we never do, because it'll break your heart. But anyway, after that, I came back, I came home from Korea. They sent me to Fort Lewis, Washington, and Mr. Hartzell was there. He wasn't there when I was there, but he was across the highway in the Ranger group, and I was on the south side in the 12th Infantry Regiment of the 4th Infantry Division. And you hear about our rapid deployment units today. Back then, we were called the Strike Force. And the 4th Infantry Division was the third component of the Strike Force. And by that, we had to be trained 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, basically, to be ready to deploy. And so I got back and reported out there in September. And in the latter part of January, our unit deployed to Alaska for 3 months for cold weather training. Then we came back from that, which it was a delightful experience. I loved every minute of it. And I'm probably one of the few Arkansas guys that was awarded what the Army called the 100-mile ski patch. I skied 100 miles. And I've wound up, as Mr. Hartzell's aware of the things that we get, but I wound up with the 100-mile ski patch, which I'm very proud of. In fact, my wife put it in a special quilt that she made. But I was pleased to do that. We came back in the latter part of March, and then in June, we deploy again to the Yakima Desert. And we go out there and spend 6 weeks. So that 2.5 years that I was with the 4th Infantry Division, it was continual employment. I mean, being deployed to different types of things. Had I joined the outfit a year earlier, I would have participated in an atomic explosion. If you don't remember it, but we had troops dug in some distance away from a small nuclear explosion. Had I been there a year earlier, I'm thankful I wasn't there, because so many of the guys developed cancer. So anyway, in January of 1961, my wife's dad had a major heart attack, and of course she came home, and you know, she went home, and her and my youngest son. But anyway, when she came back with all of this that I had, you know, I'd been gone basically 3 years from the time that I got to Korea back. I'd been gone 3 years, and she got fed up with it. Now, I was a military career guy, but I loved my wife, and she loved me. And after she got back from visiting her dad and all, and I understand that, she said, "I love you, but I'm going home with or without you." I said, "Okay." Now, this was in February or March, somewhere in through there. I said, "If you will wait until June, my ETS, which is I'm discharged from the Army in June." She did. We waited. And I came home, or we came home, and there was a wrinkle in the law. The only time I drew 2 weeks of unemployment after I had used up my leave time. I think I wound up about 38 days of leave. And after that time was over, I drew 2 weeks of unemployment. they had come up with this freakish GI Bill. It's not freakish, but anyway, I think I made $122 a month for my GI Bill. So I went to enrolled at Henderson and got my degree in physics and mathematics, intending to go on to engineering school. And my second son came along. We had been told, my wife had told when our first son was born, chances are, a million to one, you ever have another child. Well, my senior year in college, 4 days before I graduated, my second son came along. So anyway, that necessitated me getting out and getting a job. And so I went to Mountain Home and applied for a position with a company up there, and it came down to me and an engineer. And of course I knew the engine, but when it came down to degrees, I had a BS in math and physics, and he had an engineering degree. Well, he wound up with the job. I came home, and a week later, the superintendent of Magnet Cove called, and this was in August, just before school started. And he said, would you be interested in teaching? And I said, well, I've never thought about it, but I need a job. I'll try it a year. Well, I did. I enjoyed it. I loved it, and I stayed with it up until I think I'd been here about 20-something years, and I went through the midlife crisis. I thought I needed to try something else, and I did. And I wound up with a job with the Bayreuth plant over there. I wound up in management, making twice the money I was making teaching. But then in 2.5 years, they shut down and was going to transfer me to Houston, Texas. And I said, that's not an option, because I have 2 young men, 2 sons, about one of them was your age. I have 2 sons, and I'm not taking them to Houston for them to finish high school. So to make a long story short, I went to Glen Rose, worked 1 year. I went to, after that, I went to Washington as high school principal, and then I was blessed to come back to Magnet Cove as superintendent, and then spend my last 9 years here as superintendent. Now, you say that had nothing to do with military. You're absolutely right. But during this process, that after I got out, there was and I was in physics and in math. There was a National Science Foundation program that offered all kinds of scholarships. In this country boy from Magnet Cove, Arkansas, I got to attend Michigan State University on a scholarship and study astronomy. I got to go to Sam Houston University in Texas and study astronomy under one of the most fascinating characters I've ever met in my life at Sam Houston, as well as one from in Michigan who is from Denmark. And I got to go to Oklahoma and study. So for a period of time, I'd go into school in the summer, drawing $120 a week to go, plus all of my tuitions, and go into these high prestigious schools. So it delayed me. But after I settled down and got my degree, my master's degree, I went back in the Arkansas National Guard. And back then, the nuclear aspect was a big deal. And so I wound up the nuclear NCO, stayed there for a period of time, and then moved up into the operation aspect of it, the planning part of it. And then continued on up till I made E8, till I made Master Sergeant. And then, you know, if you go on, I served as a platoon leader / platoon sergeant. Not a platoon sergeant, but I didn't have a platoon leader. So I served as that in a rifle company. I served as a first sergeant in a rifle company. And then I was called back and got to step up to the brigade level, which is a much higher level, as a senior operations NCO for that. And that rank was an E9. So I was promoted to staff E9. Then I was blessed and fortunate that I got to go to the Sergeant Major's Academy in El Paso. And after that, I was promoted to Command Sergeant Major, which means I had the wreath and my stars on my stripes and such. I was promoted to command sergeant major. And Mr. Hart's was aware of this. When you get up to that level, which is, and I'm not bragging, I'm thankful that I was blessed that I could do it, but that's the highest level that you can go as an NCO. You know, it'd be like Mr. Hart was going up to a general. Well, when you get up to that level, you get lots of opportunities. And I was very fortunate I did. One opportunity, my unit, we got to go to Panama and go to jungle warfare school, which was absolutely fascinating. In 1988, I got to go back to Korea and participate in one of the big computer war games that they have in Korea. And in 1988, I stayed in the 33rd floor of the Lottie Hotel in downtown Seoul, looking out over this magnificent city. And you know, from the 50s when I was there to there, the change that had occurred. But the sad part about it, the younger people, and I'm not picking on younger people, but the younger people in Korea did not at the time appreciate what we, when I say we, the United States had done for them back in the 50s. They were ready just about to give away the farm to reunify North Korea and South Korea. Well, as you guys know from your science, you can't make black and white come together. And that's just the situation. North Korea, as you know from your study of history and such, they're so secretive, so totalitarian that it's pathetic. But anyway, that disappointed me, but it was a great pleasure and thrill to go back. For the first time, I was able to eat a meal in a restaurant there, because when I was there before, we didn't touch anything that wasn't cooked in our mess halls. And so I got to go to a nice restaurant and eat a meal, and I'm convinced to this day, and I didn't know it at the time, and please don't be offensive or but they love to eat dog as we love to eat chicken. And I am confident, I'm confident that one of my meats that I ate was dog. And you know, and it's one of those things, had I known it, I wouldn't have, but I didn't know it, so I did. But the Guard afforded me some awesome opportunities. I got to go to Guatemala. I was fortunate. I got to carry some high-tech equipment down to the embassy in Guatemala. We had a unit down there at the time, so I got to jump on a Black Hawk and fly around in Guatemala and do these things. And again, simply because of the rank that I had achieved. I got to go to Honduras. Interesting place. I went in on the east side, got on a helicopter and flew to the west side. So I saw the Atlantic Ocean, flew over to the west side, and there's the Pacific Ocean. So it was absolutely fascinating, but like I say at the offset, I would have been a career person, but my wife couldn't handle it, and I understand that. You know, being a young woman, we had a young 2-year-old son, and here she is in Washington State by herself 90% of the time. But it worked out well for me. I tell people I got to succeed in 2 careers. I got to succeed in my educational career, and I got to succeed in my military career. And I got a little pension out of both of them. So I'm thankful for that. And I appreciate you guys and gals very much, and Mr. Hart for what y'all do, and especially the programs you set up for the veterans and such.
We want to thank you too for your service and everything that you do. And as most of you don't know, Mr. Coston, as he said, he was the superintendent here, and he was also a teacher, and we're so fortunate. He's also one of our school board members, and so he helps with all the helps provide the schools with everything that you guys have. You need to thank this man right here for being a part of that and doing that. So we just thank you for coming out and visiting with us today.
Well, it's my honor and my pleasure, and I hope that I touched enough on the military to help you, and not so much on the other. But it's all a total part of the completeness of my life and the point at which I am now.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
And I thank you guys, and we appreciate y'all so much. Y'all do an awesome job, and we're proud of Mr. Hartzell for what he does for y'all and what y'all do in return.
Yes, sir. Y'all give him a round of applause.